Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to go through the full process of how we made this journal right here that you see on the screen. So glad that you guys are here. If you're new, subscribe below. Otherwise, just enjoy. Thanks for watching. So to start out here, you'll see that we use mini papers. Right there were our digitals, and they are available on our store online. Basically, what we're going to be doing today is just seeing how we created the base material for our journal. And right there I was just sizing out, cut out the cardboard, and then you saw that I created the long run that P had gone ahead and colored with the brushes. That's how it turned blue. And this is the binding tape that we use in quite a few of our journals. It's either we use the paper which you saw, the long white craft paper, or we will use the binding tape like you will see right here. Basically the size was a 4 1/4 square on the cardboard, and then what I did is just cut out the strips, and I forgot that the easier way to do this is actually to tear one longer piece, fold it in half, then cut, because then you have both your front and back. See, now I have remembered that that's what I needed to do. But there I had to go ahead and cut an additional one because you want to put it on both sides, obviously, because it's sticky, as you see there. I get the hang of it here in a minute. It takes a moment for me to remember sometimes how I do these things. And on this particular one, I did go ahead and make the strips shorter because I wanted to kind of have that little gap there. Again, just to add to that feel of the mountains, and you'll see it more towards the end of it as things progress. Had to trim it up, wasn't quite, which in the end probably even wouldn't have made a big difference if it weren't spot on square with the others. But and the 1/2 inch gap that I leave there for the fold, I just kind of came about that with knowing how some of my other ones have worked out, and that we end up making pretty chunky tags, and obviously the more stuff that you want to put in things, it needs to be able to allow for it to still fold. And that 1/2 inch really turned out to be a good size. I think at some point it would get to be too much as well, because then you would be too floppy, but that anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 inch works out really well. So see there, you can pull the tape out, fold it over, use your scissors to cut, then you have your 2 pieces that match up better. It's a great little tool if you have a boning tool as well. That works out. I actually have a new one, which is great. The little plastic ones do wear down and get kind of scuffed up, which can cause some issues when you're running across nice paper. You can see those were some of the ones that didn't quite match up, so I was just kind of cleaning up the edge so I didn't have sticky stuff sticking out. Alright, so now the main part of the journal, the base is what I call it, is complete. That's your fold, that's the accordion. And now you can see here the blue paper is what we created in a similar, well, almost exactly as we had created some of our last journals, with just a very long piece of the white craft paper and then folded it. It has already been ModPodged and everything. In this particular one, what we ended up doing, or what we will end up doing, is cutting that. And here you will see this is the top of the mountains, which is a printed version of one of P's pieces of artwork. We've actually used this in cards and all sorts of things. So I went ahead and included that in the digital kit as well, in case you guys want to use that. But it is what made the top of the mountains. I ended up having to create or print out 2 additional ones to make the full mountain range across all 8 panels. And here you can just see I'm trying to kind of figure out what makes sense. I want to not have to do any more to the blue part than I have to, because I really like the shape of it. And so right now I'm just kind of trimming up and cleaning up before I go ahead and paste it down. And you'll see that I'm using both Posca markers and alcohol ink. The alcohol inks are really great because even after it has been ModPodged, they will work on both front and back. The thing you have to keep in mind is that on the ModPodge side, it will reactivate the ModPodge and get gooey. So you'll see in certain areas here where it kind of even started to stick down to itself. Just something to kind of keep an eye out for. Just it will dry as it does, but it does reactivate the ModPodge. And then the Poscas are great because they just kind of sit on top. Keep in mind with those, they will rub off, so you have to seal them once you have used them on there. And on this one, I went ahead and glued it down, then did the tearing because it was the first, and I knew that the one side, the beginning, was going to also have the rough torn edge. This is just a regular PVA glue. I'm still learning to love this. One of the reasons is the cap drives me nuts. I can't seem to get it to come out enough, even though I keep trimming it down. I know that if I cut it too low, then it's gonna glop out and become a hot mess as well. So kind of our go-to glue is the art glitter glue. I love it because it dries so quick, but sometimes you want to be able to move things around a bit more, and that PVA glue is a bit more on the better price point than the art glitter. Kind of one of my techniques to know that I'm matching up, because I don't always cut everything exact, is just to, you saw me there, run it to the side, and sometimes I'll even use the boning tool to create a crease, then I cut it along that. Just a kind of quick way to make sure things match up. It doesn't always work perfectly, but I use the Posca markers quite a bit, especially on the edges, and if I were to do this over again, it would be smarter just to go along and do that prior to even attaching the accordion together. It just wasn't, thinking ahead well enough on this. So I ended up just, doing it as I went, which is a little slower process. Those blending markers that you see me using there at the top are really awesome, especially for torn edges. They fill in and work nicely with printed paper. For whatever reason, they don't seem to... I do have certain, like if you use watercolors on the printed papers, it will bleed out and then cause like watermarks. Sometimes that's a good thing. Most of the time it's not. So those blendable markers are quite great for that sort of thing. I use them all the time on my printed pieces. So as I said before, here are the 2 additional the printed mountains that I needed. So I think I even flipped these, which if you know how to do that in your programs, you can print them so that way they kind of match up and mirror better. We did a lot of work to the mountains even after, like once I got them glued down, torn, and all of that, then P came back in, which you won't see in the video a lot. Any of the work that P does usually doesn't get recorded, unfortunately. We're working on that. But she came back in with colored pencils, and really touch those up, because you can see even I did a little work here just to show basically what the technique was to blend those pieced together portions. And the color pencils work brilliantly for it. And the nice thing is, because this is created from original artwork, a lot of times we use the exact same media. So there was color pencil in the original. So they're going to match, and that works out really, really well. She got a little upset with me that I went ahead and did some of that, but I did want to get some of it on camera because I knew that she probably wouldn't record it herself. And I got smart on that when I made a nice long one, and I knew that they were going to run across. I also did them, like, I didn't glue them down in a straight line. I made sure that I tilted, and you'll see kind of how I start to adjust and move it up and down. Now I'm kind of doing that same technique where I said, like, I just kind of put it up to the edge, push it in along there, and then I know that that's basically where I need to cut it and match it up. So now you see me using more of the art glitter glue. I love it. It comes out perfectly. It's so much easier to use than anything else that I have found thus far. Doing a little cleanup with the X-Acto. As I said, it is not always perfect and short-proof, my method of the creasing and then cut. Nice thing is so you see I'm using the color pencils again there. When I cut with the X-Acto, it kind of roughed up that edge. Just come back in with the colored pencils, fill it in, and it's like it never happened. My attempt with the PVA glue again. I do like it because you can smush it around a lot more. The art glitter glue, you cannot do that. Like, you need to get it down. Otherwise it just starts to dry up and then you have bumpy stuff. Back again with the markers, just touching up those edges. What is also nice about those markers is that even with the colored pencils, it comes in nicely and blends those. I don't know how or why that happens, but it's pretty nifty. You saw P's hand in there. That was her telling me not to mess with those into the color pencil because she was going to do that, but I went ahead and did it anyway. So more cutting, more of kind of the same. I probably will go ahead and just speed this up a bit more because I think you get the idea that it is just using that one long sheet. More of the alcohol ink markers, touching up those one areas, the white that I knew would probably, that was going to show through. Certainly on the edges, lining it up, kind of adjusting, figuring out the line. You can see on that one, it's kind of tilted, as I said before, and then it was a lot easier just to glue it down, then cut it, making sure that I have a straight line, because along those folded edges, or along the bends, I knew I wanted it to be straight. So here I am going to go ahead and really speed things up, because obviously, like I said, it's pretty much the same thing, just cutting out the mountains and getting them across the top and matching up each panel, making sure I have enough showing. I did adjust that panel a bit, and then I came back in with that Posca marker, or the alcohol ink marker, and made sure that that edge was blue. Versus sometimes on the white craft paper, it will not saturate all the way through unless you have really put on the paint, whatever it is, or marker. So whenever you tear the edges, it's good to have something to come back with and touch those up if that's what you want. Or sometimes a white edge is very nice. Okay, and you can see kind of coming towards the end on this side of the journal. Finishing up just some of the marker touch-ups, and then like I said, P came back in and did a lot of pencil work across that entire mountain range. And there you go. Now we knew on the other side, the back side, or what would end up, you can see that I have written on there that that was the cover, because trust me, we have made that mistake before. It's best just to write it on there. That we were going to use that same blue paper and come across that mountain range, creating a little bit of a skyline. Now you can see that across the top there. And then what that in turn also did is cover up the white of the backside of the paper. This went much faster than the mountain range. I was a little less particular about the torn edge at the top, so that helped with moving it along a little bit faster, because it was already torn and I didn't mind that it was going to be a little bit straighter of an edge, because like I said, it was going to end up being more of a highlight, as you can see there. I didn't like that one spot just kind of blaring out at me there, so I came back again with the alcohol ink markers right along the edge, and it just soaks right into that paper. You do have to be careful with the alcohol ink markers and the printed papers. It will bleed out and mess up the ink. So try not to get too close and let it run into the printed area. So there you can see that that was all of the backside along the top of the mountains. Now it's time to kind of figure out what patterns we're going to use out of the actual printed papers. And here you can just see me trimming them up. Now, what I usually do when because I always know that I'm going to be doing these smaller journals, is I put 4 up on a page. Number 1 saves paper, and I know that I'm not going to use 20 full sheets of paper, so I always make them smaller. But the ones in this available online are full 8.5 by 11 or A4 pages if you want to print them that large. I also tend to like the smaller pattern, so when they're shrunk down you get more pattern. And if you guys want a set that is smaller, let me know. I can easily make that happen. I've even made smaller sheets of full, like just business card size for our even smaller journals. Just finishing up that end torn flap basically on the back cover side. And I think it's very close, like how we had laid it out. A few of them did end up changing around. You'll see that like from here to the finished product, but we were close. We were close. Just sometimes once you have it down and you're thinking about, all right, well, what's the next panel, things change. And I'm not sure at this point if I had the actual photographs printed out yet, because that was one determining factor in which patterns we used. And here we wanted a more fluid flow on the back, so we went ahead and used more of the blue paper to fill in the folds. But we left them just the binding tape visible on the inside. That was kind of new for us too, doing it that way. Alright, just finishing up the last of the fold pieces. So something to kind of keep in mind here is that because I had 4 up on a sheet, even though width-wise it was gonna work, I needed more at the top on this particular panel because I didn't bring the blue down enough. But no worries, I just went ahead, tore up some pieces, and you can barely even tell that that's what I had done, because I even came back in very lightly with the alcohol ink marker, because again, it will make the ink bleed. But I did actually do that on this particular one because I didn't want to see the rip all the way through. Actually, I guess I did a few different markers there just to kind of blend it all in. But I had less of that issue on these, and see, now you can tell I just kind of tucked it up underneath there, did the fold, did the cut, and adjusted it that way. Which was a lot simpler than that very first one. That was tricky, trying to work that placement out. And these stayed exactly as is. We did not come back in and do anything to the printed sheets. That part of it, that section. The only thing is we obviously, we come back in ModPodge. So I'm just trimming up some more edges, getting more of these sheets down. You can see there again, just adjusting some of those. Kind of thinking back and realizing some of these I should have done a bit more on those middle sections, the connection pieces. There's a little bit of a struggle towards the end, but again, you see me using the PVA glue. We're starting to become a little bit more better friends. That stuff still is a little tricky to get used to getting it out of the bottle. Something else to keep in mind with that is that it dries glossy versus the glitter glue, which does not. Normally it probably isn't that big of a deal, but if things get off the page, or you get a little glue somewhere you didn't anticipate, it's going to be shiny. I think I trimmed the tip like 3 different times to finally get the flow of glue to where I wanted it. When I glued down the top parts of to cover up the white paper from the mountains, I did leave a little flap there. You can see that, so that way I purposely could come back in, tuck that, and I didn't have to tear the printables and have to do a lot of work that, otherwise would have been another little bit of a time-consuming thing. I only had to do minor adjustments. So you can just see I'm just kind of trimming up those edges again. Had a weird little spot there. It's pretty easy again with the white craft paper. Because the way that it tears, it's almost like it's perfectly made for patching. I'm actually going to take a little break from the main part of the accordion, the journal, and P had gone ahead and made a little bit of a fold because we knew we were going to put a little booklet inside of there in one of the pockets. And so this is again some original paper. This is original artwork. I did supply a printable version of it in the kit, but you can see I'm just putting in the magnets for the little clasp because we wanted it to kind of be seamless. There was a little bit of adjustment here and there that had to happen. I think I even had the magnet on backwards as at one point. So tricky. We also adjusted the paper that went inside of this 2 different times. The original dyeing of the paper, which I believe is part of some of the last video that we did on the dyeing of paper with the watercolor crystals. It was just too dark and I mean, it's going to be perfect for something else, but we wanted that whole idea of the sunshine to come through also in this little mini booklet. So we did a set that you'll see in the final version, which is the more sunshiny yellow, which was hard for P to do because she doesn't always love to do some sunshiny yellow things. So just finishing up the booklet. There you have it. Now we're going to get back into creating the main accordion. So here we have it. Back to where we started there, or left off. Went ahead with some of the Posca marker and did it before I glued down the piece, the printed sheet. That actually worked out a lot better. Alright, now we have moved on over back to the mountainside. And again, this was more area that we just simply adjusted the part that was behind the flip up or the flip down. I didn't want any of it really showing through at the top. It's kind of like a happy little surprise inside. All we ended up doing with those are just ModPodging over it, and they look spectacular. I mean, some of them look better than the originals. Just because the color pops. It ended up being a lot easier just to fold and hand tear those than to do a lot of cutting with the scissors or the guillotine. And you saw there with the alcohol ink marker along the torn edge at the top, again, because I just didn't want it to be any stark contrast between the torn part and where it left off into the blue main panel. right now we're kind of coming to the end of the main panels. Really at this point, quite a bit of the journal is done, sort of. I say that, but then there was the cover. Now this particular printed sheet, I wanted a little bit more blue in it. I wanted that blue to just have a little more contrast. So I came back in with the Posca marker, or sorry, the alcohol ink markers, and you can see that there. Worked out really nice in this particular instance. That isn't always the case. So now, time for the pictures. I did print them out on photo paper. I think I have them sized about the same in the printable set. This was some leftover watercolor paper I had from, I think, a card project. I love how it tears, and it was kind of a weird sheet, and I wasn't sure what to use it for, and it turned out to be perfect for this project because, as you can see, I was able to get 2 of them in there. I knew that I wanted the torn edge to be at the bottom because I was going to come back and gild it with the Coliro metallic watercolors. They are fantastic for that and many other, anything that you really want to make gold and shiny, or silver. I use the silver too. I use the gold more. Art glitter glue really has no problem on the photo paper. I have had problems with certain glues that it bubbles and things don't stick, but no problems with art glitter glue. Instead of ripping a whole new sheet, I ended up adjusting the size, the width of 2 of the photos. So you can see that's what I'm doing there, because I just had that little bit left over. It was gonna, it was just shy of what I really wanted, but I thought it was better to just utilize what I had versus tearing a whole big sheet just for those 2 little photos. There you have it. And just kind of figuring out placement of the different photos. I sort of knew which ones were going to go with what, so that's what you saw there. At this point, I am going to I've rounded up all my little scrap pieces, and it is time to do this set of Modge podging, because I think this is probably at the end of the evening, and I usually try to do that so then the next day whatever I have done is dried and can be worked on more. And I've gotten this process down pretty decently. You saw me roll out the one board. We cover cardboard with freezer paper. It's fantastic. Works for all sorts of things. Probably, if you've seen the dyeing paper, we use it for that, and then it's great for Modge Podge. Even though it wasn't quite tall enough for this particular one, you see it getting onto my cat sheet. But as you know, a lot of times that becomes the artwork that, like, a lot of the printables were made out of, or catch paper, or in themselves will end up being, additional art. You can already see that how much richer the color becomes with the Modge Podge. Plus the fact that the Modge Podge will seal it and keep them nice and clean and keep them from getting so worn. Because the idea is that people will want to open and close and move this book about. This one was a bit tricky simply because it was so long. And you saw even when I was doing the paper, the little panel pieces, that I did it kind of in 4 sections, or I'd have the 4 panels out and have it bent over. Now with the Modge Podge, you can't exactly. Okay, so now we're back to the pictures. Here you'll see me glue this, and then I'm like, oh wait, I'd really like to make those shiny gold. So that's what I did. I wiped off the glue, and then I came back in and as I was talking about earlier, wanted to gild those edges. Again, just kind of bringing in that idea of the sunrise. That the sun is coming up, that golden ray, even though it's at the bottom. You can see my little helper, her hands in there. That is actually one of the reasons that we can't keep audio in our main part of our video and have to do the voiceovers over. So okay, now we're just gonna glue them down. You can see that that's one of the smaller ones that I trimmed, but overall, very rarely I think would you have them all opened up, and I don't think that it made that big of a difference. Certainly wasn't worth, like I said, doing that whole new sheet just to get. So that particular one, I wanted, it had to go with that paper. It's just the tree in front and the patterns in the paper was perfect. Each one, like there were the papers were picked purposefully. Okay, now we're going to move on into cutting out some fish. This is Shrinky Dink. I've never used it before. A long time ago, a friend of mine made me some stuff. I always thought it was super cool. P decided to buy some, and so we made these fish. I only ended up using one. It was an interesting process. I did, you can't do them in the oven. I did them with the heat gun. And so, pretty neat. Probably use it again sometime. They didn't shrink down nearly as much as I needed to. I mean, obviously, if I would have printed smaller fish, I just, you know, they say 20%. I don't know. What's 20%? It's also very tiresome cutting that thick paper. Or, well, it's plastic. So, word wise on that. Also, some little notes on that. I did do one of them where you saw that I colored it on the back with the Posca marker before. That worked out a lot better, but then I forgot to do that on the others, so then I had to come back. Anyway, that's the fit. So here, finished up the photos. I have some tags laid out, some done, and a lot of it not. So cardboard, clothing tags, various things just laid out there, getting kind of an idea. You see the little frame thing that we used from the Sierra Club. Okay, so now you're going to see, I showed you there, that is the Distress Glaze from Ranger ink. Anyway, Tim Holtz stuff. You can use Vaseline. We use this each and every time we put ModPodge down, because it is now dried long enough, and this is also, I think, probably the end of the night. So this gives it time to kind of settle in and do what it needs to do. But you do want your ModPodge to fully dry, then you put on this glaze or Vaseline. Go very lightly, buff it out, and overall it works quite well in keeping things from sticking together. Alright, and that was kind of it on that, and now we're back on to tags. This is really the beginning of creating out, or building out the main set of tags. So, earlier when you saw me piling up the tags, I had actually measured all of those and got a basic idea of how I was going to then print out the quotes to go on them. Each and every one of them is about mountains, And then there was a little bit, the tidbit of information there. This is the Denali tag. It tells you about Denali. I try not to waste any bit of the torn bits and pieces, and that's why earlier you saw when I cleared off the table, I put it in a bag. And now those pieces come in very, very handy. And along with the offcuts that you see off there, where I'm picking out of the pile there, that from the larger cut pieces. Each and every bit of that is going to be used either in this or, who knows, in a future card or journal. So what had happened is when I used the marker, some of it transferred over there, and I end up covering it up with some more torn pieces. I really kind of like how it ended up. It looked pretty cool. So I've had this particular piece of yellow paper for quite some time. It started out as just a textured yellow sheet of cardstock. I love the way it tears because the white does show through so brightly. It's great for cards. And then I think it has sprays and also watercolor, like clear the shiny watercolors on it as well. Okay, so as I said, it has a really great white edge that I'm going to cover up and make shiny gold. I did consider keeping the white edge, but I think just overall it was a better deal to, again, just add more shiny detail to it, and even did a little extra there, added a bit of gradation to it. Now you see I have the gold embroidery thread out, and now I'm just trying to figure out placement so that way when it sits in the pocket it shows up properly, and then I can figure out the length of the gold embroidery thread. I use some just foam dots, pop dots. Use them a lot in cards, but I also use them in journaling. If you watch any of our stuff, you know that I love this gold embroidery thread. I use it for all sorts of things. I probably went a little crazy with the pop dots, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't get wonky because I knew it would be moved around a lot. And then I ended up turning it around and fluffing out the threads a little bit differently than I had originally had it. But it worked out great, and actually having those dots in there was nice because I kind of thread it through there, and then it helps keep the thread puffed out, which was really cool. Happy accident. Alright, so that is that tag. Fit in there great. Now, this tag is made out of a paint sample card, like that you get at the hardware store. The purple of it was just, it's so cool because it's just very dense. It did have a little bit of glue, kind of gloppy glue stuff left over on it, but once I ModPodged it, it was perfect. These are my Chiagami little offcuts. You can purchase them in like the 3-inch squares, and then those other ones are just 6-inch long offcuts, which are so great because you get a variety, and then you don't have to have these huge sheets, which, I mean, obviously it would be very nice to have the big sheets, but I didn't want to commit to that. Now, originally when I had printed out and measured my tags, I had thought that everything was going to run, you know, up and down, long, or, you know, top to bottom. But I ended up separating a couple of them and using them like you see here. And either turned them to the side or on the purple one, just to the bottom. Coming in with the alcohol ink marker, adding a little bit of that blue just because there wasn't much in there. See, I was trying to scrape off the glue parts. Here I'm just using the brown ink to distress the edges. This is kind of my favorite one to use simply because of its size. I like that little ink pad. And it's kind of, that particular ink is kind of gooey. You do have to watch out because it doesn't really dry up quickly. And it will, if you get it wet or use markers near it, it will spread. It's not the archival permanent. But once it's ModPodged, it's not a big deal. And one of the things I did there was use the Posca marker first and then distress the edges because it helped hold, because that particular little clothing tag was kind of plasticky. So by doing the Posca first, it helped hold on the distress ink, or the ink. That was one of the textured tags. We do have a video for that texturing. I apologize now if you do jump over there to see that we had some technical difficulties, but we still worked it out. And if you see my crocodile there, the big purple X is because that side does not really work that well any longer. And even on these thick tags, I come back with the scissors and retrim them, because I used it on too fat of a cardstock, or well, it was chipboard, and it's not quite the same sense. You saw there I was using the Posca marker, just I dab it and then just gonna use your finger or something to move it around. It works really well. It's kind of like just using acrylic inks, or paints. I don't typically have those right on hand. That's one of the reasons I love using the Posca markers. So I used almost every bit of the orange or peachy colored torn off pieces from the mountain, from the scenery. I used all of those here, which is pretty crazy. Like I said, very barely, I mean, unless they're absolutely little tiny pieces, they should probably still go in the bag, to be honest. Very rarely do they go to the trash. Eraser comes in handy every once in a while with the glue parts that kind of smoosh out. It will kind of pick it up and remove it. It's not always the case, but it's worth a go. blendable markers once again with the little edges. I love how it looked on this particular tag. So now I'm just highlighting the top of the mountain and some of the parts on the front side or back side. Technically the back side is the side with the quote. I liked it so much there at the top, I went ahead and decided that it might be kind of cool to make these textured tags even more special by gilding the whole outside, the border, or the edge really. It did come across as a little bit of a border along the sides there, and I ended up trimming this particular, a couple of them were shy of the size that I thought it was, so here you'll see I'm going to trim it with the guillotine. I ended up actually keeping that piece and using it here later. Now for this one, I went for a little faster way rather than tearing out a million little pieces. That's still that leftover gold paper, textured paper that I have, and just did a little trace, trimmed it, fussy cut it, glued that down. Well, actually, I think I waited until there. Got the quote on there. Really didn't like where that was hitting. It was just way too much space there at the top, so I knew I needed to bring in something else. One of the other things, so you see me touching up at the bottom, there's one little white area in that one corner and just really was bothering both P and myself. So did that, then brought in even more gold on the tag fronts. Same thing with the ripped torn edge. So on this one, it was starting to chip on the edges and at the bottom. So I went ahead and brought in a few things. Alcohol ink marker. That soaked into the chipboard that was showing through more than I wanted it to. So then I came back in with my Posca markers, even a chalk marker there. I just really love how they work. And again, if you had acrylic paints, you could do the exact same thing. So I made it a goal, like, on these tags to try to be as efficient as possible about placement of things. So that's why you kind of see me there adjusting and then just tearing it and making sure that I was really thinking about what was going to be in the background and the foreground, because it does save time. So many times I've glued something down and said, oh, I really wish I hadn't glued that down yet, because layer wise I needed to put something underneath it. That's the tricky part about the collaging or just doing all the little torn pieces. I didn't like how flat the top of the mountain part there was, so I came back in again with one of the little chalk markers, started getting a little bit more depth across the mountain tops, and I knew I needed to kind of separate that break that is there as well. It was looking more like a crown at one point, and so I was like, I need to get more of the mountain depth back into the top of that tag. There you saw the Lindsay spray. I needed it to be shiny because I had shiny at the top, and I wanted that element to be brought down to the bottom, so I just took it over to the trash can, sprayed it, and that's why you saw it kind of curl up a little bit there, because it will do that. But now I turned that printed paper into something a bit shiny. Gilded one of the torn edges on that little piece, and then brought it in there just to break up that yellow ever so slightly. Now that it's all there, trimming it up, you can see it was a bit tricky getting it under the guard bar there, because it was kind of chunky, but I got her under there. There again, see, using my sad crocodile. It does still sort of work. Cleaning up with those edges that I cut. I think I came back to those mountains a few times. Finally, I was happy with the results there. I would say that one thing that I use probably the most, or top things, are the Calero watercolors, my Posca markers, and gold embroidery thread. It's kind of my top three for sure. And glitter glue, art glitter glue. Yes. Top four. On that particular one, because I knew it was going on the more winter scene, that's why I used the silver. Old clothing tag coming in handy. I was afraid that some of that was going to show through, so I went ahead and brought in a bit of the acrylic paint, just so that way it would cover up some of the writing and not make it shine through so much. Now again, like what I was talking about, I knew that I wanted the white or cream colored paper to be in the very background. That's why I went ahead and glued that down. And now I'm going to start layering in some of the printed paper. The original of that purple and blue swirl paper is actually tissue paper and done with oil rubbing. And it's amazing how it picked up everything. It really looks very much like the original. Trying to bring both the pattern paper to both sides on this particular one. I thought it was kind of cool that it was like wrapping and ripping through. And when we were deciding on, you know, Mountain Sunrise as a name of the journal and also the paper set, it just fit because all the colors were there. And what's really interesting is that some of these pattern papers, the originals, the actual artwork, P has had for years. The rubbing that I was just talking about, I think that was many, many years ago that she did those. And then we just kind of gather them up and put them into sets. that was the offcut piece that I was talking about off of that one tag that I kept. And it looks really cool as a little kind of fluffy thing. Technical term, fluffy. I could have just very easily made them all very simple and just glued them down and been done with them, as you see the top row above there. But in order to continue with that mountain range feel and the very organic, just overall feel of the whole entire journal, I thought it was very important to continue that even into the tags, even on the back sides. You saw there, I split it so that way I had the top and bottom. I wanted to center that up. I thought it was very interesting how on that one pattern paper I could get both kind of earth and sky, and the quote is perfect for that particular layout. Things are coming together. Trim, trim. One more go at bringing in those gold elements to those tags. I'd kind of done it on the one there, and then I brought it back in. And I also thought that it being very organic, like the geodes, and I know that that's very popular now, especially like with the pouring, the paintings that people do with the epoxy, I believe it is, to make those look like geodes, kind of cracking through. And it's very interesting that one of the pattern papers, because it's crinkled, it has that look of almost quartz. And if I would have done this particular little thing properly, I could have folded it from one piece. But because I didn't print it properly, I had to cut it and then glue it down the right way. I had laid it out that way and thought that I was going to do it, but I forgot to flip it before printing it. And it's just a little bio Wikipedia about John Muir, who I think there's a total of like 3 different quotes, and the very beginning of the journal is one of his quotes. He's a pretty interesting guy, and it was funny that we had the Sierra Club card thing punch out, and I used that in one of the upcoming tags, and it was very fitting for this particular journal and for him to be in it as well. I didn't like the bend, how when I folded it, the fold was showing through and crackly because I had to, like I said, piece it together. So this was kind of my solution to fixing that. And again, giving that crack feel, very organic. And just kind of figuring out where everything goes. So that way I can then start to create little homes for everybody. Oh, I went ahead when I had created that tag, I was like, the quote is about violets cracking through. And I knew that I needed some violets to crack through. So I went and found a little picture of them and printed them out. And fussy cut them to put them there perfectly. Those tags, there's 2 of them, they were alcohol inked. That's how that process created the bubbling, almost bubbling water look. Bring in the colored pencil just to add definition to the flowers. Sometimes when I print them out on that particular paper, they smush out a little bit. They're not as crisp of images, but I like that paper. So, and I know that when I end up Mod Podging them, that crispness almost comes back. So you can see that we cut up our, like I said, we use the freezer paper to wrap our boards and create movable pieces for our artwork, both to Mod Podge and do different media on. Well, when the box was done, we cut it up, and that is now what I'm using to create some of these tags. Just touching up the edges with the alcohol ink marker and gluing down. This particular printed paper, the yellow with the periwinkle, is also a rubbing, but I layered it, so it was altered digitally. It's really interesting looking, especially after the Mod Podge is put down on it. It's almost transparent in certain, like it would look when it's a tissue paper. So now I'm just kind of beginning prepping for the cover, but at this point it was still even a day or so before we got to the actual cover. P had done some of it, but this is that inside piece that you see at the very beginning. And with this one, I did a great job with thinking about how the quote was going to go on there. So I was able to tuck it into the fold, or where it was going to fold. And you still haven't seen it yet here because, again, it was a day or so later that we pulled together the rest of the paper, the original papers that are used on this inner flip open cover piece. But I was at least prepping out these two elements. So you can see there, tuck the fold, and that was perfect, which is great for vellum because, as many of you know, if you put the glue directly down, you will see it through, and it isn't always the most ideal. And there I'm trying to figure out if I was going to use that starry paper. That was the same paper that we used for the little booklet, and then some other options that P had done. But those still weren't quite the right papers. There's the one. And I knew it. Like, it was like, oh yeah, between these two, that's certainly going to be the direction that we go. I needed to know, though, what was going to be on the other side. P was still working on it. And now, just again, coming back into the panels, getting more of the tags done, figuring out who's going to go with who. All right, so then that particular tag needed a friend, and I did an opposite. So where one had the ripped edge on one side, the other one had it on the other side. And then they matched. And then I paired those, or there was a set of 3 with one of those tags I had already had done the back side off of another journal that it just didn't fit into. You can see I had written in permanent marker on the back side, which ones went with what quotes, because like I said, I had measured them out, trying to be as efficient as possible and lay those out on one piece of paper versus printing out a few here and there, having a bunch of leftover paper to figure out what to do with. Because I do that a majority of the time. Now it's kind of sad. I ended up not having enough of that one paper, so I ran some things across the other side there in hopes that that would work, but all in all, well, you'll see it here in a second. So the dark blue looked really good. I just didn't have any more of just those little slivers left, so I colored in the bottom part with Posca. P came along and said she hated it. I didn't think it was too bad. See? Now I will say one thing about the blendable markers is what you just saw there. Sometimes as they get a little older, the cap part comes out. Had another one of those kind of globby, but with the Posca marker moments. I tried my very, very best to cover it up or fix it. In the end, it probably would have been okay. I just didn't love it. I was trimming up my marker because they get really messed up with doing all of the edge work that I do with them. Best to just cover it up. And then I needed the dark blue to come into play up at the top there as well. This is our new crocodile. Has a scalloped because it was supposed to replace the other one, the broken one, or the injured one. It's not really broken, it's more injured. And P thought she was ordering the same one, but now we have a scalloped one, which I like very much. Highly recommend it. So here I'm just doing the companion one to the other. And I think what I'm going to do here is actually create some more of the deckled edge, which is coming up. Trim this up. But I have my watercolors out there. And you'll see the little spray bottle that I have with it. That is really handy because then I don't have to have a big glass of water or jar or anything around, container, and I can just spray them as I go. One thing you do have to be careful with on the watercolors is when you're using them with the printed papers, which I didn't mind in this instance, it will make the ink from the toner, it will bleed, creating kind of a water run. But for what I was doing, that was actually a good thing, which I did with the alcohol ink marker as well. I wanted to split because I had, on some of these, I have two quotes, so I tried to bring in kind of a break in the middle, in the middle of each of those. So I think I do come back later on once I have some other little scrap pieces to use for that particular using the alcohol ink as to distress or color the edges. I wanted a thin border of the blue all around. Those are the two tags there that were alcohol inked. And I think that was on their original, because of the material that the tag was. She applied the ink directly to it. Mr. Huey's spray works a lot like the Lindsay's sprays, I've noticed. We just have a lot of those Mr. Huey's, which is sad because they're no longer available. I sprayed purposefully, I sprayed the printed sheet because I knew that it was going to bubble and bleed out to resemble that same look that was created on those two other tags, the alcohol inked ones. That's that sprayed piece I did. Didn't quite fit after I'd folded it over, so to make up the difference I used another scrap piece and then added a little bit more of the gold watercolor for the edge. Give that crackled feel. I tried to use that scrap piece of paper so the way my background would stay nice and clean for you guys, but as you see, like throughout this video, it progressively gets messier and messier. And I think at one point I finally just kind of give up on it. So now that all the tags are done at this point, so now it's coming back to each panel and figuring out, is it going to go in a pocket? Is it a belly band? How is it going to best be attached to the panel? And one of my favorite things here lately is to use the vellum like I have there and create belly bands because they ripple and look really cool once they've been Mod Podged, and also when you use the alcohol ink markers on them, it's pretty nifty because you can do like what you see here, color them in. You can get some really cool gradients and fades with them, and if you don't really care for what is happening, you can always come back in with either just a cotton ball, or what else is nice with the little felty kind of squares that you use for stamping, and just clear off as much as you want. These little washer looking round pieces are what we call some of our rusty metal. There's a video for that to see how those were created. And then what we do is I just cut them out on my Cricut, and we have tons of them, and then P usually uses them when she's just has additional alcohol inks when she's mixing things. and uses that to create those sometimes, or she does whole new sets like the ones she did in the Rusty Metal video. Then we run them through the embosser. Usually we Modge Podge them a couple of times in between all of that, between doing the embossing and Modge Podging. These particular ones, some of them were Modge Podged and some of them were not. They hold their shape better if they are Modge Podged prior to gluing down. They come in really handy to have them just already made. And we figured this out on, I think, one of P's journals. We did this where it just catches, because I didn't want to cover up the paper. I wanted to feature the paper and also show as much of the tag as possible. They're not necessarily, these are to be featured, not hid. You can see there how the yellow was like really, really, really bright. Just sprayed it with the alcohol, lifts off what I need it to, and then it kind of soaks into the edges, which is really a nifty effect. And when you add the alcohol inks to them, they become almost a bit more transparent than what the vellum already is. It's also really cool. I thought it was nifty, like how it folded back, and that's why I just went ahead and continued that look on each one of the belly bands that I did. Ripped that little piece and it looks like it's been folded back, or it's just tearing. I wasn't too worried about the glue showing on the edges there. It kind of added to the effect that was already happening. So normally I would try to hide that somehow, or if I was really, really, thinking ahead of things, tucking those back behind the sheet that you would glue down. So if you were to reproduce this or just do something similar, that would be one way of making your edges more clean. These particular ones, I wanted to put it had to be a pocket because there was 3 of them, and I just didn't see how belly band was going to necessarily work that out unless I made some attachment. So a pocket was the answer for this particular one, which was kind of nice. The 3 pockets, I believe. I think there's 3, 2 or 3. Turned out really pretty nifty. In the fade, how it goes into the background, and in there almost just not, it just becomes part of it, which was perfect. That is exactly what I had hoped for. Just touching up those edges with the alcohol ink. It kind of crackled, and it'll do that. Vellum's very funny with glue and heat and other things. It gets warpy and crazy. A lot of times it flattens out. Sometimes it does not. But I went ahead and just continued that same look of the little torn piece and put it in the corner for 2 reasons: to help cover up what was happening there, and then part of what was going on there is my pocket wasn't tight enough. So things were just really too loose. So I had to tighten the pocket up. I wasn't aware that there were multiple envelopes of the washers, but now here's a new set. So I had more options to go, and again, wanted the washer thing to show, but not become some glaring thing that you focus in on versus the tag or the papers in the background, the artwork. And another nifty part of the ModPodge process is that it turns paper into, it looks like canvas. So when it is these mixed media backgrounds, like the ones that we create for printables, they end up looking like new pieces of art or canvas. It does that with anything. I've done that on multiple journals of some of our info pieces and printed out artwork from, you know, Van Gogh or Claude Monet, and it all ended up looking like canvas, which is really cool. It's just a happy bonus. One of the things you do have to watch out for when you're doing those belly bands with the vellum paper is the alcohol inks will kind of make the vellum stretchy. So you don't want to pull it so tight that when it starts to dry up that it will pop. It will crack. But you do want it taut enough to hold things down. And then when you come back with the vellum, that helps with securing and keeping the vellum more pliable, because the vellum does become brittle. Here you can see I was like, whoa, that is really bright, but I wanted to again make this pocket look like it was part of the paper. It blended in versus becoming this, hey, here's a pocket. So you'll see, hopefully I move those tags. I don't know if I thought about that or not, but you will eventually see that this particular pocket matches up. I was very pleased with how this one turned out. It was kind of cool using you saw that I used a little dauber with the alcohol ink. Vellum is one of those great things to do alcohol ink art on. It's much like Yupo. It has plastic in it, so it works really well. And you can get those cool little drops and blops. This particular panel, I think, is one of my most favorites. I love the tag. It looks so majestic, like mountains do. Mountains are majestic. And that tag just makes me so happy. And then the other little tag that I put with it, the wispy one with the crazy little whoop-de-doo at the top, that was just the offcut, I think, of that tag. I love the gold embroidery thread. It just looks so cool with this particular journal, but I just always love how fluffy and fluid it is. So, like I said, I knew that this was going to be one of my most favorite ones, and even on its little belly band, I put the gold because it's special. And I would have actually used my heat gun maybe to dry that, but I believe my 3-year-old was taking an actual nap, so that was not in the cards. Creating that same type of belly band over here on the Denali tag. So this is the flip side, the Mountainside. And I knew that needed to be held in place. I'd like to probably come back and make one for the other card that goes on the Mountainside, because it falls out all the time. So it's nice to have things kind of locked down a bit when you're moving about. And I loved this particular washer. It's not a washer one, it's just one of the circle ones, because it was such a nice repetition of that sun. And it had the cool waffle embossing on it from one of the embossing folders. I did actually have this one peek above the flap. simply because you knew that some stuff was going on with this one just because the sun's peeking out of it anyway. So now P has already crocheted the wrap. We did do a video on it. It did not turn out very well. Technical difficulties have just been ridden with our poor mountain sunrise, our little off videos. We had trouble with our texture one and also with the crochet one. It just is what it is. I have a link down below to some crochet videos that we like very much. So for any level of experience, I think that they would be very helpful. So basically it is just ripped saris, sari ends that we have purchased. They come in big bundles, they're fantastic, and then they are crocheted together, and once more our awesome gold embroidery thread used there on the edge as the trim. It was also one of the determining factors on this was the paper that I was going to use. I have included both the starry paper and this in the digital kit. Obviously it's not going to be shiny like that, but could easily be brought back in by using, if you do have the Coliro watercolors, just doing some spatter on it. I would recommend even printing it out, ModPodging it, then doing the Coliro or one of any number of other sprays, even the Lindsay sprays or any of that, and you would get the same effect. And there's the starry paper, so it's both that and the one that we use for the interior. This is the very last tag. I forgot, and technically I don't know if it's really a tag, it's more just a little tuck insert type thing. I love that idea of the specimen cards, and so P had these amazing photographs from when she lived in Alaska, and they lived in an apartment for a while, and the door had frost on it, and so that afternoon it changed, so she has kind of a series of these photographs. She's never seen it since. It was just some weird one-off thing, but get these amazing photographs out of it, and so I was like, that's gonna be a really cool thing. I printed it on vellum, used the Sierra card club thing that came in the mail. You saw that I popped out the card there. I used the part as a template, and then that way I had the back. It had a plastic coating on it, and that's why I'm using the alcohol ink markers there. It worked perfectly, much like the vellum. It's a perfect thing. And again, with the alcohol, just alcohol on there. That could be done with just regular alcohol inks as well, versus the markers. Probably would even work better. I love the markers. It's easy to open and close them. So one of the things we did realize is that it needed a bit more tassel at the end of the wrap. So that's what I'm doing here is, thank goodness we still had a little bit of that particular pinky red left over, and along with the gold embroidery thread I created a tassel. One of the things to keep in mind with that gold embroidery thread is that it comes undone on its own very easily. So anywhere we had an end, I did secure it down with glue. And then I even came back on the tassel part. I'm not sure if I recorded the very end part where I sewed it up, just to really secure it. And there you see I had put the glue down, and I was going to clip it. And then I wrapped. So now, finishing out. ModPodging bits and parts that had not. You can see how I just Mod Podge just the band, and then I'm coming along with the palette knife, making sure that it's not setting on top of the panel. Even if it does, you can come back. As long as you have a little spot, you can still lift it. Just would rather not, because sometimes it will pull. That was that one that I was talking about, and it just turned out so great. Really very pleased with that pocket. I can typically do both sides when I am Mod Podging. If you do it just right and don't apply too much, you can get it all done in one session and make sure that you just have somewhere to lay it that it's not touching any flat side. So if you just kind of put it on its edge, that usually turns out pretty well. I didn't want to cover the textured cards in ModPodge, so I kind of spot hit it, and that did turn out really pretty cool. It was a neat effect. And those are those papers that I said they look translucent. They have that feeling like you've layered something there and you see something in the background. And after you Mod Podge them, they really look that way. One thing I was having a little bit of concern about, but if you go lightly and go quickly, the ink from the print, so the quotes, would start to kind of bleed out with the Mod Podge. So if you just go in one direction, go very quickly, it's kind of a tip there. It will then stay in place. But if you work it too much, it's going to start blurring out, and that'd be a real bummer. Because after all that work, and then your quotes are all murky. So I hadn't really thought about this one much, but it was a bit awkward to move the fluffies around and then get the Mod Podge on there, but I got her done. And even did both sides. Now this is a pretty interesting one because, as I had said, the vellum gets warpy and wonky like when you put the Mod Podge on there. And it really went crazy, and I was like, oh, I hope this thing flattens back out. And it did. But it did some very strange things, as you can see there. But I wanted to make sure that I did put the Mod Podge over even the printed vellum piece, because certain colors I have noticed will just rub off on the printed vellum. So that was a Mod Podge. Here now, bringing the little book back into play. I was going to maybe move this towards the front where I had done the magnets on it, but this was kind of real time. So basically just creating the signature. And after talking to P, she was like, it really needs 3. So I came back, and hopefully, because that's what I'm doing right now, is just talking to her. She said to put the 3rd one in there, and I was like, well, that might be kind of cool. So it just brought the thread back through. I know this is probably not the proper way to do it, but it worked for me. I liked the way it ended up looking. Created some cool little dangle pieces both on the inside and out. Now the fish is back. I really tried to use all 3, but I just didn't like it. It was too much fish for a little booklet. So I only ended up using the red one. just unbraiding, unwinding the embroidery thread. I like it when it looks tattered. So we're going to put a little PM on this, and then securing the fish. Basically what I ended up doing, the little drill thing didn't work. I ended up heating up a needle and poking it through, just to kind of bring that back around. Now, we really are getting into the last bits of things here, because there is the cover, which finally dried. So I wanted to make sure I used this paper in the smartest way possible. And I was kind of sad, like, even that backside is so beautiful. And I think I have pictures of it too. I hope so. It really wouldn't be all that crazy to recreate, because again, the funny thing is this is all catch paper. Or it started out as catch paper. That was like my trash can paper. And it's just so beautiful. But I wanted to save that little piece because it was just going to go behind, and there's no sense in covering it up. So I kept as much as I possibly could, because I ended up using it on both the front and the back for this little door. It was pretty amazing how here you have the some original art or background paper along with the printed paper, and they go so well with one another, and especially after the ModPodge was applied. Wanted to make sure that that was secured, because I knew it would be open and closed, so just kind of clamped it down. So here I am now on the back panel, and the funny thing is I've noticed that the back, the textured piece with the sun is not, that's just one version of it. It is not its finished self, because once I had it to that point, P had taken over, or I think that evening decided it needed other things. So then it became what you see now in the finished piece. So now I am using, seriously, like the last little bits of this paper. I do have one larger piece that I did find, but I wanted to create that sun, and I knew some of that backside of that paper was that nice golden stuff, but I couldn't work it out in the whole placement and trying to use and need what I could get out of it. So instead I used the scraps, used some linseed spray, added a little bit more shine to it, and then P did some magic later as well, because it is not, again, this is not its final self. This video would be 3 hours long if we had every little bit, every moment. But this is kind of the final touches in this. Now you see P's hands in here because I was helping make dinner. So she did the ModPodge on the front cover and in the inside. She's just hitting it here with the glossy ModPodge on the water areas, and then coming in and doing, because those pieces hadn't been ModPodged yet. I can't believe she used that smaller brush. And you can see how it wrinkles up there, which sort of like scares you, freaks you out at certain points, but it does flatten out. So far, that has been our experience. And she had to keep it standing up like this, because I talked her through it and said, all right, if you want to get it all done on all sides, that's what has to be done. I just want to say thank you guys for watching this, and hopefully that this was a good ending to everything, and that you will like and subscribe below. Click the little thumbs up if you like the video. Please do subscribe. We have more stuff coming, and we're only getting better every day. Thank you again. Bye!